So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another outstanding Authors at Google Talk. Today we're really thrilled to host Jody Eddy in our midst today. I first met Jody when I wanted to know more about the cuisine of Iceland, and it turns out she's an up-and-coming expert in that field. But she's done even more awesome things as well. She's a cookbook, a food blogger, a writer. You can find more of her information at jodyeddy.com. So today she'll be speaking to us about staff meals, her latest book, and it really raises some interesting questions. You know, the restaurant world is out to entertain and to feed and to serve the general public, but what do they do for their actual staff? And so to that end, Jody interviewed a wide variety of chefs and restaurants and came up with this book, which she will now talk to us more in detail. So please join me in welcoming Jody to Google. Thank you.
So I don't know if anybody here has worked in restaurants before, but what a staff meal is what the chefs cook for each other and what they're making for the dishwashers that are there, for the wait staff that is there. And I used to be a chef, and one of the restaurants I worked at that was a prestigious restaurant did not serve a decent staff meal. And I actually never even ate it. I didn't even know what a staff meal was because I always skipped it. And then I went over to cook at the Fat Duck, Heston Blumenthal's restaurant in England. And it was a 17-hour day, 6 days a week. And on the first day, we went outside, and there was picnic tables just lined with incredible food. And I asked one of the chefs if it was a holiday. And he said, no, this is our staff meal. And they did it twice a day. And it was truly the thing that got me through those brutal days. And so I was the editor at Art Culinaire magazine, and I was meeting with a friend, and we were talking about the possibility of writing a book. And she had also been a cook. And we were just talking about what that thing was in a restaurant that we loved the most. And it was a staff meal. And so we decided that's what we would focus on. And so it's a little tricky because a lot of restaurants have terrible staff meals. And as we did our research, we really wanted to find those genuine staff meals. We didn't want a restaurant to just put on a show for us when we showed up. And so we just kind of did some covert research on Facebook, through Twitter, just asking. We had so many chef contacts in the industry, just asking, do you have a great staff meal? Tell us about it. And we didn't tell them what the project was about. And research or information just poured in about incredible staff meals around the world. And so it was really heartening to realize that it wasn't just the restaurants we had landed at that had incredible staff meals, but they existed all over the world. And so that's kind of how it started. And it was really difficult. We had 25 restaurants in the book. It was hard to really focus on what those 25 staff meals would be because we were finding hundreds and hundreds of amazing staff meals. But we focused and we found our 25, and it was interesting when we started writing our book, which was about 3 years ago now. There wasn't a lot of research out there on staff meals. You didn't see it mentioned anywhere. There was a gourmet magazine article written about the El Bulli staff meal. There was David Waltock's book. He's a chef who used to run a restaurant called Chanterelle. He wrote a really beautiful book on staff meals about 10 years before, but that was really it. So we had a hard time initially just getting a book deal and finding an agent who believed in this concept because it wasn't something that they were familiar with in the industry. And they thought it was going to be too obscure. And even when we started approaching the restaurants who had great staff meals, they didn't quite understand why we would want to focus on it. It was always a tradition that was just kind of back of the house that nobody really thought about. It was kind of an afterthought for them. But then when the restaurants we visited, when they started looking at what they were actually doing every day and realizing that the bottom line, were happy employees, they realized themselves like how incredible this tradition was. And today, there are mentions of staff meals everywhere. And even as we started writing the book, I asked Ferran Adria if he would be in our book. And he told me he was writing his own book on staff meals, which really scared me initially. I thought, well, Ferran is writing a staff meal book. That's going to be the staff meal book. And then restaurants started serving staff meals to their customers, and there were food trucks opening up about staff meals. There were restaurants opening up. They were serving their staff meals. So we were initially a little afraid that, it was going to be very oversaturated by the time our book was released. But a friend in the industry said, this is great. It's creating a genre. And I don't know if you have a lot of staff meal related restaurants here, or do you see it now? Are you seeing it mentioned? So that's kind of how we began. And I visited every single restaurant that's in our book, and it was tricky at first to figure out how we were going to coordinate photography. And so we ended up using regional photographers for every restaurant. So we have 17 photographers in our book. And we were a little concerned that it might look like a mishmash with all of these photographers, but I think it actually really speaks to what Staff Meal is about, because each one is so distinctive, and I feel like it worked for us. And so we also brought along to every visit a journal, a sketchbook, and we brought art supplies with us, and because chefs are actually really creative people. And so we had them, we have these incredible journals filled with drawings and artwork about what staff meal means to the chefs. And so if you look throughout the book, you'll see writing and you'll see drawings, and those were actually elements that came from these staff books. We're actually trying to figure out what to do with all of these staff books that we have, because we have hundreds of illustrations by some of the world's top chefs, and they're not all in the book. And so we're figuring out if we should do a book just solely based upon that. So this is, if you've been, it's a regional restaurant, Ad Hoc. I really felt like Thomas Keller in his French Laundry cookbook writes this really incredible piece about staff meals. So I really felt like we needed to have a Thomas Keller restaurant. And I was initially thinking French Laundry would be where we would land, but he really wanted us to focus on Ad Hoc, because they actually are serving a staff meal at Ad Hoc. And so, and they do this incredible, they have an incredible tradition there. Every Monday, they don't work on Tuesdays, they have this blowout staff meal. They save the wine from the week, all the leftover wine. They can bring their dogs to the staff meal, and it's this gorgeous feast. And so that's what we covered there. And we asked if we could also cover their daily staff meal, just a regular staff meal. We were like, well, it's not that special, but sure. And that in itself was this incredible meal. So once again, it was, them not really realizing how unique and special this was. And Thomas devotes he has a chef on staff just exclusively to make staff meal every day at Ad Hoc. That's how important it is to him. And, we talked a lot about, what is that bottom line? What does staff meal, deliver to your restaurant? And it's just, there's so many intangibles really, but ultimately it's a really happy employee. And I think that's, very similar to Google. It's delivering to you this quality of life that, you can't get everywhere. And when I've talked to chefs who don't have good staff meals at their restaurants, they feel really bitter about it, because they know that there are restaurants out there now, with our book, with other books that have great staff meals, and they realize, maybe they're missing out. And so that photographer is Eric Wolfinger. He photographed tartine bread. So I work with him on several different projects, and he's a great guy to work with. This was Arzac in San Sebastian, Spain. And I don't know if you're familiar with Arzac, but it used to be it's a fourth generation Spanish restaurant. And Juan Maria Arzac really put avant-garde Spanish cooking on the map. It used to be a traditional Spanish restaurant. His daughter, Elena, who's standing next to him, she was just voted the San Pellegrino's best female chef in the world. And what was so special about their staff meal is they have this beautiful marble table in the back of their restaurant. He's always served a staff meal. And Elena said, I've been sitting at this table having staff meal since I was 2 years old. And it's just really incredible how much it was a part of her life. And that shoot was a nightmare. We have over 100 cooks, and we had to stand on a busy median to take the picture, and everyone in town knows Juan Mari. So we couldn't it took us hours to get this picture because everyone was stopping by to say hello, and he was engaging, but we eventually got it. And this is Upi de Cochon in Montreal. They do an after-hours staff meal, which is kind of unusual in the industry. But so at around 2 o'clock, they're banging out their staff meal, and it was exhausting, but they were all really exhilarated by it. And I thought it would be lighter food because it was so late at night, but it was this heavy pork because they're known for pork, and it was intense. And this is the Bristol in Chicago. I actually cooked with the chef there, Joe, at the Fat Duck. So when I asked Joe, what's the best restaurant in Chicago for staff meal, he's like, mine. And I said, come on, tell me he's like, mine, I'm telling you. So I trusted him, and it is actually amazing. And I had such a great experience with this chef and this restaurant. I'm actually writing a book with him now. So something really positive came out of this visit. And this is John Currents, who is City Grocery in Oxford, Mississippi. And what was really, I think, interesting about this is I really respect John as a chef, but when we invited him, and I've worked with him before, so I thought he would say yes right away, and when I invited him, we didn't get a response at first, and then he kind of put us off, and then, so I finally said, if you don't want to do it, that's fine, and he's like, you know what, I'm just so embarrassed. I've had a restaurant for 10 years, and I don't have a staff meal. I've never served one, and it's something I've always wanted to do, but I just have never gotten around to it. And he said, so this book, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start. And so he started the staff meal tradition because of our book, which I thought was really, for their employees, it was, a pretty amazing thing, all of a sudden to add this great perk to their day. And when I went back on the book tour, it was maybe a year later, I thought, I'm gonna find out if he's still serving staff meal. And every day they have an incredible staff meal. So there's John. And this is Dill in Reykjavik that actually I think Cliff has been to. It's how Cliff and I connected. I spent a lot of time in Iceland, and this staff meal was really unique and special because when this restaurant started, the Icelandic economic collapse happened, and all of his investors, the chef's investors, had pulled out overnight. So his staff worked for him for free for months. And it was really incredible. And his producers supplied free product to him for months. So this staff meal was the day after Christmas, and it was him. He let his employees invite their families. So it was a really extravagant meal, but it was a real thank you to his staff for, really sticking with him. And now Dill is one of the most successful restaurants in Iceland. And but it was really special, and that's Gunnar and his partner Oli in the business. And so I'm now writing a cookbook with him as well. And I have more on that later. But and this is the Fat Duck. And so it was really fun after so many years, and it's kind of where it all started, to return to the Fat Duck and to share in their staff meal. And the head chef, Johnny, was still there. And so it was really incredible to go back. And this is Frasca in Colorado. And they actually served a Mexican staff meal, and that they're known for their Italian cuisine. And that's something you find in staff meals a lot too, is that the restaurants aren't necessarily serving what they're serving in their restaurants to their guests. But they're an amazing Italian restaurant, and I really wanted an Italian meal there. And so they served a Mexican meal, and I did ask them, could we do a second staff meal, and could you do Italian? Because I really wanted to showcase that, so they did, but it's certainly something you see with staff meals all the time. And this is Grace in Portland. It's in a church, so it was just beautiful to shoot. And this is the Herb Farm in Seattle. This is actually the first staff meal I shot. And they invite their producers, their fishermen, once a week to their staff meal, which that's something you find as well with staff meals is it really becomes, they integrate it into their lives and into what they do and who they're working with. And this is Anissa in New York. It's Chef Anita Lowe. This is Craigie on Main, Tony Maz's restaurant. Tony has one of his criteria for hiring his chefs is they have to cook a staff meal before they're hired. And he needs to see that they are up to snuff. And he does that by gauging their staff meal. And that's something certainly that I think is really special about staff meal as well. It's a time for chefs to experiment because you're not necessarily going to do that and put it on the menu because your guests might not like it. And chefs are their own, they're brutal critics with each other. So you often see, I talk to so many chefs whose menu items evolved out of their staff meal through a lot of experimentation, through a lot of really harsh criticism from their other chefs. But it kind of becomes a laboratory for that. And I think it's another great thing about staff meals. This is Morimoto in Philadelphia. The first staff meal Morimoto ever served when they opened the restaurant was a maki roll. This restaurant is huge. It's incredibly long. And he made a maki roll that was as long as the restaurant and had his staff line up. And they all created it themselves and they all rolled it themselves. And that was their first staff meal, which was a great way to bring people together. And this is Cochon in New Orleans. Again, very pork heavy. And this is Sean Brock, McCrady's. And he, again, has been serving a staff meal that is just incredible for over a decade. And when we interviewed his staff, they're so loyal to him. So many of them have been there with him from the very beginning. And they cite staff meal as well as a reason why they stick with him, because it really shows that devotion that the chef has to his staff. Sean, of course, he's all about bourbon and pork, and so he did an Elvis Presley milkshake that was, certainly the most unhealthy thing you could ever eat. It was bacon and ice cream and bourbon and bananas, but it was delicious. This is Uchi in Austin. And they are also known for their staff meal. We've talked about Uchi and how incredible it is, really. And this is Mugaritz. This is Andoni Otteritz in San Sebastian, the third best restaurant in the world right now. And what was really special about his staff meal is a year before, his kitchen had been incinerated by a fire. And they had to close down for almost an entire year. And so they had reopened just a month or two before. And I asked about that first staff meal when they all came back, because he also is known for his staff meals. And he said, it wasn't anything elaborate. It wasn't because we were still under construction, but they just had a pot of tuna stew in the middle of this construction site. And his chefs from around the world, restaurants, had absorbed his chefs while they were waiting to go back to Mugaritz. So all his chefs had returned from around the world, and they had this staff meal. And of course, he said it was the best one he's ever had. But he takes staff meals so seriously that he devotes an entire station in his restaurant only to staff meal, that two chefs are always manning. And he has a nutritionist who develops their staff meals because he feels like, it's not just about having a great meal, it's about getting yourself through the day as a busy chef. So it was very impressive. And other chefs that I talked to about this, the nutrition, they were like, no way. But he takes it that seriously. This is Anna Sorten at Oleana in Cambridge. And I'm from Minnesota originally, so I had to cover a Minnesota restaurant. So this is Piccolo in Minneapolis. And again, Doug Flicker, he served, I expected Scandinavian or German, and he served barbecue. And it was a lot of fun, but definitely unexpected to have a big barbecue blowout in Minnesota. And this is the Slanted Door. And this is actually at the commissary where Charles prepares a lot of the food for all the different restaurants. And his aunt, who he calls Mama, actually, she doesn't do it as much anymore, but she used to always prepare the staff meal for all the employees. And it was just an incredible day. There were about 80 employees there that she was cooking for, and it was really amazing. And this is Stéphane Reynaud, who wrote a book that is one of my favorites called Pork and Sons. And this is him at his restaurant in a suburb near Paris. And he's one of my biggest food heroes. He's one of the reasons I went to culinary school. And So when I got the email from Stefan that he was going to do it, I was just, and it was just an incredible day. And this is Fergus Henderson and his partner Trevor. And again, St. John in London is known for their offal. And he served a completely vegetarian meal. It was an Indian vegetarian meal. It was incredible, but not what we expected to have. But he actually ate, he didn't participate with his staff in the meal. He ate his meal on the side by the bar. It was a slice of caraway bread and a glass of Madeira. And, we asked, do you always eat by yourself? And he's like, no, but sometimes you just don't want to do staff meal with everyone there. Sometimes you just need a quiet space in the corner. And so that was his solitary staff meal. This is Ubuntu. It's actually closed now, unfortunately. It's in Napa. And again, it's a vegetarian restaurant, really incredible. But I covered them for Art Culinaire, and when maybe 2 years before, and when I was leaving, I saw a giant pork loin on the counter. And I was like, what is that? It's obviously not going into your menu. And he's like, that's our staff meal. We're such carnivores here. So for their staff meal, it's usually a blowout meat fest. And then at night, they're serving vegetarian. And and this is WD-50 in New York. And they, again, had they're very avant-garde. And their staff meal was a traditional French staff meal that, again, you just never expected to come from them. And that, my friend Ben is on the end of that picture. And he, again, is a chef I worked with at Fat Duck. So it was really fun to kind of integrate all these chefs I had these great staff meals with in England. Later on. And that's Michel Bras at his restaurant in France. And that's him and his granddaughter. He has his grandkids come in when they have school off. And what's really special about their staff meal is he's got a slightly avant-garde restaurant, but his mother used to run a traditional French restaurant. And she has been making staff meal for them for decades. And that day, she's in her 80s now. She's not doing it every day again. But his staff has an incredible staff meal, and they eat it in the back. But he has this table in the front of his kitchen, and his entire family comes. His son works with him. Their wives come. The grandkids are there. The mother comes. And he said, as a busy chef, this is often your only time to see your family. So it was really a real family meal, which is something staff meal is always called, just to see his entire family there. And they come every single day for the staff meal. And this is Ferran Adria. And I interviewed him for another project, but the interview turned into him talking about staff meals for like 2 hours with me because he feels it's so important. And so I asked him, I understand you can't be in our book, you have your own book, but if he would do our foreword. And so he agreed, and that was a nice... And so I did a kind of an untraditional book tour. I didn't really do a lot of book signings in cookbook stores or in bookstores. I revisited a lot of the restaurants that were in the book, and they served a staff meal to journalists that came, and so that people could really get that behind the scenes staff meal experience. And it was a really, I think, fun way to kind of break out of that traditional bookstore signing mold. And we just had a really good time, and it was fun to return to these restaurants. And so that's Elena and Juan Mari, and it was exhausting, but it was really rewarding. So that's staff meals, and then I was going to go into Iceland, a book I'm working on now. But does anybody have any questions about?
Is this usually happening? Is it before they open, or is it?
Yeah. Usually, if they do a lunch service, then it happens around 3 o'clock during the day. And, often there's somebody in charge of creating the staff meal throughout the day. So that's what they're doing for the day. But it's not necessarily the chefs that are preparing it. It can be, as a stage at the Fat Duck, I had to prepare staff meals a few days. And it's so nerve-wracking when you're, new to the industry and you're cooking for that. It's much more nerve-wracking than cooking for customers, actually, because you're cooking for your peers. But usually around 3 o'clock. And like I said, a few of them did do after-hours staff meals, but that was rare. And if they're not devoting, if they don't have a chef on task that's doing the staff meal, it is often prepared, because what staff meal is all about is just using all your leftovers. So often a chef has to just run into the walk-in and find, whatever is there on the staff meal shelf. There's usually one devoted to it, and just grab the ingredients and prepare it in 10 minutes, which again is very nerve-wracking, but it's a real test too, to who you are as a cook and your talent. And
most chefs, when they're preparing meals for their customer base, they're optimizing for taste and they're optimizing for presentation and all those things that create an experience. What's the difference? What are they optimizing for when they're talking about a meal for a staff meal? And in particular, is it nutrition? Does that actually come into it? Nutrition, the longevity of, will this get me through a shift?
Exactly. Yes, definitely. It's, something I heard over and over again from cooks that I interviewed who were not the head chefs. Just, they really preferred light staff meals. They wanted something that would then send them into service just feeling like they ate Thanksgiving dinner. So they really did focus on that, using all the leftover vegetables. And but of course you're using your beet greens, not your beets that are going on the menu. And but there was certainly a focus on that, not necessarily to the extreme that Mugaritz went, but you're also getting, because of the plating issue, it's served usually family style, and it's just giant platters. And we really emphasize, don't plan this ahead of time. Just really make it organic and really let it evolve out of your leftovers. And we did go to a few staff meals where the meals were just so beautifully plated. It was like service for their customers. And like, is this how you really do this? And they're like, no, but you're here, you're focused. We're like, no, we really want the real thing. And then they're like, oh, right. So then it all goes on the family platter. And, I think that really brings everyone together, that communal eating, but certainly very different than what you're seeing in the restaurants.
What's your favorite staff meal you've ever had?
I never answer. I have a few, but I try to remain diplomatic on that one. Just because I feel these chefs really put themselves out, and they really are. It sounds like I'm trying to be diplomatic, but they really are. They were wonderful. So I do, of course, prefer, with the fat duck and my connection there. I think they always have a little leg up, but because certainly, often these chefs are given maybe 10 minutes to make the staff meal. And so, a lot of them would say that it's something throughout the day as they're doing their mise en place, their prep work for service, and they're chopping off, the tail end of a vegetable that's not going, or they're using the, often they're not serving the chicken thighs, only the chicken breasts. Or at the Bristol in Chicago, they use whole chickens, but then they have all these leftover chicken feet. So they actually did a dish that was all the chicken feet and they said they're always thinking about staff meal and what, as all of these leftovers are happening, they're trying to maximize, like, what dish is going to transpire out of those ingredients for staff meal. One thing that I also love about staff meal is that a lot of these recipes are coming from their family favorites, their beloved family recipes. What I saw at Fat Duck, we had chefs there from all over the world, and often you were getting, the chef from Argentina, his grandma, his favorite recipe from his grandma, and then you'd have a chef from Mexico cooking his favorite family recipe. And that was, I loved that exchange also that happens between chefs from around the world really sharing what they're about, because often that's not what they're cooking in the restaurant. So it's a great learning experience and a nice kind of way to learn about cooking in other parts of the world.
I was just noticing the geographic distribution of restaurants that you chose. Do you have any sort of, did you have any idea of where you wanted to go versus just choosing really great staff meals?
We just wanted really good staff meals.
Did you find a concentration anywhere?
They certainly, a lot of chefs you talk to, like Thomas Keller will attest to this, a lot of chefs who have cooked in Europe, they talk about the incredible traditions of Italy and of France in their restaurants. They have staff meals often twice a day, and they're really amazing. So I wasn't necessarily looking to France or looking to Italy, but you certainly heard that from chefs who had worked in Europe, that It was very impressive. And a lot of chefs, too, that I interviewed had worked there said when they came back to their restaurants or when they opened a restaurant or when they had the idea for the restaurant, they're like, I have to serve an incredible staff meal because they were seeing that in Europe. And they're really known for it.
Jody, thank you very much for stopping by. We'll have some book signing at the end, so thank you very much.
Thanks.